Thank you for coming, and my presentation is on children's educational outcomes and persistence and severity of food insecurity in India, a longitudinal evidence from the young lives. This study comes from a project called Food Security for Equitable Futures, which is based in Lancaster University. The principal investigator is Jasmine Fledderjohann of the Lancaster University. And the authors come from three different institutions, two of us from Lancaster University, one from the University of Barcelona, and one from Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur. So let's define food security. It's a situation in which when all people have physical, social, and economic access to safe and nutritious food, which is sufficient to lead their daily lives and meet dietary requirements for their active and healthy life. That's based on our definition. So when we don't have a situation of food security, we are in a state of food insecurity. And unfortunately, food insecurity has a negative consequences on a number of dimensions. It affects physical health, cognitive and non-cognitive skills, psychosocial dimensions, and in general, it limits human development. And that's why you see the world is targeting to end hunger and achieve food security at a global scale by 2030 as one of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, however, food insecurity can damage children's health and brain development way before they are in school or once they are studying in a school. And we see that literature focuses on children under 5 years of age. So that leaves the older children, which are older than 5, and mainly adolescents, comparatively overlooked. And in the literature of food insecurity and security analysis, you see these groups of individuals as a forgotten population. Food insecurity and undernutrition are not synonymous. We cannot see them as identical, but they are strongly correlated. And a high rate of undernutrition in children or malnutrition in children can suggest there is a widespread or pervasive food insecurity. To just test this one, well, we can see that between 2018 and 2020, 15% of the Indian population was undernourished. That is like from the about 1.2 billion population, 15% of the Indian population was undernourished. And if we look at under 5 children, 30.9, almost 31% was stunted, and 17% was wasted. So stunting and wasting are two dimensions of undernutrition or undernourishment markers. In stunting, we compare height for age. In wasting, we compare weight for age. So whenever these two scores are below the standard, we categorize children as stunted and wasted. So how is education in India? It has two dimensions. One, because of the priority given to expand education, access to education has been expanding, and following on the 2008 Right to Education Act that has made education access a mandatory process, and enrollment in primary education has been expanding and reaching too many children in India. Unfortunately, however, Indian children underperform on key learning benchmarks. These are when we compare Indian children with children from a different country, but on the same development on economic growth scale, Indian children underperform. And this is so when we look at children of age between 10 and 12, 1 in 5 of this age group cannot read a second grade English standard. This is also the case in private schools, and there is this dichotomy of private and government schools, that private schools are better, but in India, even children in private school are not doing well in terms of reading for a second grade standard between the ages of 10 and 12. What are the gaps in the literature that we have identified? One, as I said earlier, there is this focus on under 5 children. So we have children and adolescents that are forgotten. Most of the studies are based on cross-section data, so we try to complement that by using longitudinal data. And we combine severity and persistence of food insecurity in one study, where most of the studies either deal with severity or persistence alone. This is a general conceptual pathways that we envisage that food insecurity and children's educational outcomes are associated. So the first line would be an experience of food insecurity can lead to a higher demand for money and food that can potentially be made by reducing spending. And when households reduce spending, they can do so by limiting or reducing school expenditures and or expenditures on educational materials. That's going to impair or limit the progress of students in complete education years, or have a lower test score in some of the tests they are supposed to take. Or the need for more money and more food can send children into employment that leads to absenteeism in school or reduced study time. So if students did not attend full school, or they don't have enough time to study, that means their results would be compromised. And a more direct effect is when hunger results from food insecurity, and that is in undernutrition or in the deficiency of micronutrients. That leads to reduced concentration, cognitive development. At the end of the day, that leads to lower test scores for few years of completed education. Or a hunger or undernutrition can also lead to impaired psychosocial skills directly. So the hunger has two dimensions. One, the first one I described about concentration, and the one I'm describing, which is about limiting psychosocial skills or impairing psychosocial skills. When children's psychosocial skills are limited, that means they have lower quality of interaction between their peers, their parents, their teachers, which at the end of the day is going to limit their educational performance. Our research questions are the following. So, how is the cohort level of food insecurity severity is changed over time? How is persistence of food insecurity associated with educational outcomes? Severity of food insecurity related with educational outcomes? And to what extent does over and above food insecurity, some social demographics explain food insecurity educational outcomes? The data comes from the Young Life Study Design. It's based on younger cohort and older cohort coming from 4 different countries: India, Ethiopia, Vietnam, and Peru. It's categorized or grouped into two cohorts: younger cohort and older cohort. It started collecting data from these households in 2002 and extended up to 2016. And the focus of our research is only on the younger cohort between the ages of 8 and 15 for consistency reasons. The main outcome variables that we are looking at are three. These are years of complete education as reported by the child, the vocabulary test, which is a standard procedure, POT, picture vocabulary test, or the maths test, standardized score of maths test. So these all are administered in local language, so there is no problem of administering these questions. Our key predictor is food insecurity, as I explained earlier, and it comes from the standard experience-based measurement of food insecurity, the household food insecurity experience scale, which is a 9-item based experience-based food insecurity measurement. We have got two main predictors, which are severity and persistence. For severity, we have 4 categories: none, mild, moderate, or severe. But because of sampling issues, we were forced to combine moderate with severe, and we only have 3 categories now: the none or no food insecurity, the mild, and the moderate or severe. There is also persistence food insecurity, where we combined the number of rounds of a child spent in food insecurity state, or the number of rounds that a child is present in the study. So this is a ratio of extending between 0 and 1. So 0 means no insecurity, but 1 means complete food insecurity. Our analytic strategy is based on 3 different models. In model 1, we have bivariate association between food insecurity and educational outcomes. In model 2, we added baseline values in child characteristics, as in child sex, age, number of siblings, birth order, and whether child is in a school of private education or government education. In model 3, on top of model 2, we added household demographics, as in household age, whether the household had completed primary education or not, and the place of residence against rural against urban, the head caste, and the household's wealth profile. So coming to the results, I will first show you the trends in severity of food insecurity. As you can see from the graph, in general, food security is increasing and food insecurity is declining. However, when you look at between 2013 and 2016, food security is slightly declining and the other forms of insecurity are slightly rising. When we come into the regression results that I previously explained, what we see is, for example, in here, the persistence of food insecurity is a negative predictor of years of completed education. So except that the coefficients get attenuated when we come from model 1 to model 3, but we have the bivariate regression in model 1 to the most complete model in model 3, still persistence of food insecurity kept predicting negative outcomes of years of complete education. The story is the same for the PPVT score, the P-body picture vocabulary test, where persistence of food insecurity negatively predicted the test score, except that the coefficients are attenuated moving from model 1 to model 3. And that's also the case for maths score, except that the coefficients once again get attenuated. Persistence of food insecurity negatively predicted maths outcomes. When we look at severity of food insecurity, that's what the story was about, persistence. Now into severity, we see that severity of food insecurity, both in its mild and moderate forms, predicted negative years of complete education or fewer years of complete education, except that these coefficients kept attenuating when we added up baseline scores, child characteristics and household characteristics, moving from model 1 to model 3. Severity of food insecurity negatively predicted fewer years of completed education. And when we look at severity against the P-body picture vocabulary test, it's only moderate or severe form of food insecurity or severity of food insecurity that is affecting PPVT score, that it kept predicting negative results, except again that the coefficients get attenuated. Moderate severe food insecurity is a predictor, a significant predictor of severe educational outcomes or PPVT score in this case. When we look at maths, what we see is both forms of severity predict lower math scores, but the significant one is for moderate severe, except that the coefficients get attenuated moving from model 1 to model 3, regardless of adding or controlling for additional variables. The severity of food insecurity is a negative predictor of lower math test scores in this case. So what is the discussion? What is the main points that we are taking now? From the graphs, one can conclude that or discuss that food insecurity is declining. Between 2009 to 2016, food insecurity is declining. However, we all know the COVID pandemic has happened 2 years ago, and it has pushed a lot of Indians into food insecurity. So when we say food insecurity is declining, we are only limited to the time period we have covered, and the figures might be significantly higher now. Persistence and severity of food insecurity, as I showed you in the results, kept consistently predicting poorer educational outcomes. And this is so even after we have controlled for child and household level social demographics. We should understand food insecurity and severity of food insecurity along a continuum. We should disaggregate severity into a number of severity levels and not just dichotomize it into secure and insecure. Our results are consistent with previous results. That's the most important thing that we should highlight here. How do we conclude? We conclude in the following ways. The first one, food insecurity is unique. We should consider it on its own, because our results kept showing us that even after controlling for child and household level baseline characteristics, food insecurity kept predicting negative learning outcomes or educational outcomes. So it should be treated on its own. Severity of food insecurity should be studied along the continuum. We should see it on a scale of severity, on a disaggregated level of severity, because some of the severity levels were related with some of the learning or educational outcomes, some others were not. And our findings can be used as a starting point to identify relevant social protection programs, especially social protection product programs that focus on school and off school. Most focus on school, but we should extend them to off school conditions, where the students who do not have access to education can be accessed. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you want to reach us, you can use my email, or we are available on these 3 platforms on Food Equity website, food_equity Twitter channel or Twitter handle, or you can find us on Food Security for Equitable Futures YouTube channel, where we have a number of expert interviews to attend to. Thank you very much again. I'm sorry I will not be able to present this in person, but that's what I had. Thank you.